Welcome to the Craziest Criminals channel. The aim of this channel is exactly what the name says, to tell stories of some of the world's craziest criminals. If you enjoy our videos, please consider subscribing and don't forget to hit the bell to get notifications when we release new content. Our first video is the story of John Darwin, a former teacher and prison officer from Hartlepool, Northern England. Darwin had been married to Anne for 29 years at the time of his disappearance, and the couple had run into financial woes. John had worked as a school teacher for 18 years teaching mathematics and science before leaving to work for Barclays Bank, and then moving on to become a prison officer at HM Prison, Home House, while Anne worked at a doctor's office as a receptionist. John Darwin also dabbled in other business opportunities, from trading at car boot sales and on the stock exchange to breeding African snails to sell as escargot to local restaurants. The pair also ran a business renting bedsits in County Durham out of 12 houses. They began running up debt when the payments they were receiving from tenants were not covering the mortgage payment they had on the houses. The lenders on these properties were calling in the debts, and without the finances to cover the loans, John came up with a plan to end the couple's financial problems for good. After finishing work for the day on March 21, 2002, Darwin noticed the sea was not flat calm, not too rough, and decided these were the perfect conditions to put his plan into action. He was seen leaving his home at number 3, the cliff, carrying his kayak. While looking over Tees Bay in Seaton Carew, Darwin's neighbor, Howie Russin, saw Darwin paddling into the distance towards a headland called North Gare. Later that same day, Darwin was reported missing. A large-scale air and sea search was embarked upon using 5 RNLI lifeboats, an RAF helicopter, a police plane with heat-seeking equipment, and 2 Coast Guard teams. By dawn the following day, the search had covered around 200 square miles of coastline. Later that day, a double-ended paddle was retrieved from the sea, and later that same day, the wreckage of his bright red kayak was found. But there was no sign of John Darwin. Rescuers were puzzled by this, as the North Sea, which Darwin had been kayaking in, was unusually calm for that time of year, and it was hard to imagine that Darwin had run into difficulty in such conditions. After the discovery of the kayak, police informed Anne that they believed her husband had perished at sea, and she went on to inform their sons Mark and Anthony, aged 28 and 25 respectively, that their father was dead. Only Anne knew that this was not true, as she had been in on the plot the whole time. After getting out of sight of the shore, Darwin turned his kayak back towards dry land. He headed for a pier south of Seaton Carew. Coming ashore close to the pier, Darwin's accomplice was waiting in a car to take him to Durham train station, about 45 minutes away. The accomplice then returned home and called the police to report John Darwin missing, stating, quote, "This isn't like John at all." The accomplice was Anne Darwin. Darwin's whereabouts after his disappearance are unclear, but around a month after his destroyed kayak was found, he appeared at a local register office and ordered a copy of a birth certificate. This certificate was in the name of John Jones, born 27th of March 1950, approximately 5 months before John Darwin's birth. John Jones had died just 5 weeks after his birth from enteritis, an infection of the small intestine. Darwin later stated that he chose John Jones as the date of birth was similar to his own, and that he wanted to keep the name John, quote, "because if I was walking down the street and someone shouted John, I would want the name John in case I turned around." Darwin also stated, quote, "I wanted the birth certificate of someone who wasn't alive because I didn't want to ruin someone else's life." Back in Seaton Carew, Darwin, now disguised in a heavy beard, returned to live with his wife at number 3, the cliff. At the home, Darwin built a secret door leading into the house next door, number 4, which was also owned by the couple. He added what appeared to be a small cupboard to the adjoining walls of the houses with a false back, which opened up to the bedroom of their other property. Whenever anybody visited number 3, John would climb through the secret cupboard and hide in the attic of number 4. When visitors who did not previously know John visited the home, he was introduced as the odd job man, although one of these visitors is quoted as saying that John was very self-opinionated and he came across as quite arrogant. He wanted to know everything, even though it was so called for the lady of the house. He wanted to take charge, as in, how much would everything be? Itemize every wall, every ceiling. After an hour and a half pricing, I even said to my wife, "Strange people." Within weeks of John's disappearance, Anne Darwin's name appeared on a £137,000 insurance claim, and she pushed to officially have her husband declared dead. She also claimed from John's prison service and teachers' pensions, and also received a bereavement grant from the British government. By the time all these funds were totaled, the couple were around £250,000 better off. Anne is quoted as saying about the letters to make these claims, "He, John, would put down the facts and leave me to reword it. He was better at maths and I was better at English. He could be very manipulative. He would treat me like a second-year pupil that he used to teach." The couple cleared their debts on their houses and began selling the properties. The profits made from the sales were hidden in multiple offshore accounts, where it could not be traced by the British authorities. John Darwin disagreed with police later when he was asked if he thought this was money laundering. With an excess of cash, Darwin was tiring of hiding in Seaton Carew by 2004. He had ambitions that went well beyond the sleepy town. He spent much of his time while in hiding playing games on the internet. It was while playing one of these games that Darwin, under the guise of John Jones, started talking with a married woman from Kansas City named Kelly Steele. When questioned about John Jones, Kelly said he was pretty nice. He was just like anybody else on there. He didn't stand out from anyone else. I probably played with him for a year on there. I considered him as a friend, I guess. Darwin started researching cattle ranches in the Midwest of America. Realizing that the property in this area was relatively inexpensive, he decided he would invest some of his money there. He told Kelly that he would send money to her to buy a fixer-upper ranch, renovate, and manage the business. Kelly proceeded to search for available properties and returned the information to Darwin. He wired a money transfer to Kelly, which reassured Kelly that he was for real. Together, they purchased a property for $26,500 and planned to add an equestrian center and a herd of cattle. Darwin told Kelly that he would not be living at the property, but would be, quote, the silent partner while she ran the business. Not long after, Darwin decided to visit his new business partner using the John Jones passport that he had acquired. While on this trip, Darwin changed his mind. Kelly said, quote, "He decided, well, I'll just stay here and work on the property, and I wouldn't let him do that. Then he mentioned living here with us, and I pretty much axed that because that was not going to happen." Kelly initially invited Darwin to stay with her, but within minutes started being suspicious of him when he started to undress with his bedroom door wide open. After this incident, she took him to a local hotel. She would not allow him back into her home after this, and 2.5 weeks later asked him to leave town. But Kelly would later discover an even more sinister side to her new business partner. Darwin returned to Seaton Carew while his investment property in the Midwest was put on hold. But he was still looking for ways to spend his newly found wealth. He knew that staying in the small town came with a high risk of being identified. Darwin started looking to warmer climates. He traveled from Newcastle, England, to El Puerto de Santa Maria in southern Spain. While there, Darwin viewed a 40-foot catamaran named Bunara, which he told the salesman he planned to live aboard long-term with his partner, also stating that they wanted to be able to cross oceans and live self-sufficiently on the craft. The asking price of the 32-year-old boat was 60,000 pounds, but John negotiated the price down to 30,000 pounds as he thought there was a lot of cosmetic and mechanical repairs needed. John insisted that this work be carried out before they completed the purchase. The deal for the boat collapsed when Darwin returned to England and started emailing demands to the boat dealer, which they refused to fulfill. Darwin then turned his attention back to his $50,000 Kansas ranch investment. He started sending Kelly Steele aggressive emails wanting to know why the renovation was not completed yet and inquiring as to why it was taking so long. When not satisfied with the answers Kelly was sending back, he asked for his investment money back. When Kelly could not raise the funds to send him his money, he threatened to torture her family, hurt their animals, set fire to her property, and then kill the family. Darwin told Kelly that he had gangster connections who could enforce the debt. Kelly started sleeping with a loaded shotgun next to the bed after receiving these threats. Still seeking an escape from Seton, Canoe, John and Ann started looking at the Central American country of Panama. After contacting a realtor in the country, the couple traveled to Panama City to meet with them. Ann told the realtor that she was a widow and that John was her, quote, friend partner. The realtor took the couple to a town called Escobal, a couple of hours away from the capital. When they were shown a 481-acre plot of scrubland near a lake with no running water or electricity, they instantly fell in love with it. While exploring this property, the couple let down their guard and posed for numerous photos. The couple went ahead and purchased the land for around 200,000 pounds, planned on building a lodge and, ironically, running canoeing holidays. Back in Seton, Canoe, the Darwin's family home was sold, and they purchased a small apartment in Panama City. On telling their sons of her plans to start a new life in Panama, Ann's sons wished her well, still unaware that their dad was alive and planning on living with their mother in Panama. The Darwins sunk all of their money into Panama banks and had their belongings shipped to Panama by container ship. In the meantime, in late November, the couple were returning from a short trip to Costa Rica and called their realtor to let them know they were coming back to start the build on the land in Escobal. Within one day of this phone call, John Darwin decided to take a taxi to the airport and board a flight back to the UK. Upon landing, he proceeded to the West End Central Police Station. He told the police that he had no recollection of what happened in the previous 5 years. When the British paparazzi learned of John Darwin's reappearance, the race began to get the first interview with Ann, who was still in Panama, to find out if she knew of John showing up. The first reporter to make contact with Ann was David Lee. He found the apartment that Ann was living in and knocked on the door. After knocking and asking questions through the door, Ann finally responded, quote, "What do you want?" Finally, she opened the door and invited Lee in. Ann Darwin appeared to David Lee to be ecstatic and claimed to be amazed that her husband had been found alive. But the following day, David was contacted by the Mirror newspaper back in the UK. The paper had uncovered a picture of John and Ann together during their initial visit to Panama City. This picture was proof that Ann had known that John was alive a year and a half before he walked into the police station in London. Once the picture became public, John Darwin was arrested and charged with fraud. Meanwhile, Ann started the journey back to England, accompanied by David Lee. On the flight, Ann confessed to Lee that she had been involved from the beginning. Lee later stated that Ann was, quote, "relieved to be going home, but frightened, very frightened." On arrival at Manchester Airport in northern England, 5 armed Greater Manchester police boarded the plane and arrested Ann. With both of the Darwins now in custody, the police began questioning the couple. John Darwin claimed that once he had cleared all the debts, he intended to repay the insurance money he had received. He also claimed the reason he had returned to the UK was to pay the money back. However, this claim was cast into doubt considering Darwin had spent money on land in both Kansas and Panama, along with trying to buy a catamaran in southern Spain. Police claimed they had received a tip-off that John Darwin was still alive a few weeks before he flew back to the UK. and that further information they received would have led investigators to the couple within weeks. While being interviewed, Anne said, quote, "It was stupid, but once I'd set along that road, it was difficult to turn back." When being asked about deceiving her two sons, Anne said, quote, "That is extremely painful and always has been." Police believe that Mark and Anthony knew nothing of their parents' deception, and unbeknownst to them, assisted their mother in transferring the stolen insurance money into offshore bank accounts. When quizzed as to whether he had used his son, Mark, in a money laundering process, John Darwin responded, quote, "Well, he didn't know any different." Mark and Anthony issued a statement upon finding out about their parents' deception. They said they had cut off all contact with both parents and had decided they would never speak to either of them again. It is thought that the cost of the couple's crimes is in excess of £1 million, including the initial search for John, the money they received from both the insurance and pensions companies, along with the British government, plus the resulting investigation. While being questioned, John Darwin said that he was under a lot of stress when he came up with the plan. At trial in July of 2008, John Darwin pleaded guilty to fraud and was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in prison. Anne Darwin pleaded not guilty to fraud and money laundering. She was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. John Darwin was released on probation in January of 2012, while Anne was released 2 months later in March of the same year. The couple also divorced in 2012. Upon his release, John tried to unsuccessfully sell his memoir that he had authored while behind bars. By February 14th the following year, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that the pension and life insurance payouts the couple had received, just over £500,000, had been recovered, partially from the sale of the 2 Panama properties. By summer of 2015, it had been claimed that the couple no longer had any assets. Anne remarried in 2015. In an interview in 2016, she said when asked about John's return to the UK, quote, "He was convinced that he would get away with this story of amnesia. I never expected him to get away with that at all. But I was just relieved to think that everything is coming to an end now, and all the lies will end." The couple's sons are now working on rebuilding their relationship with their mother. John now resides in the Philippines with his wife, who is 33 years younger than him. It was later reported in 2022 that he was planning to travel to fight in the Ukraine. At this time, his young wife told reporters, "He will have a bulletproof vest and good life insurance. Good for me."